The 2021 NBA regular season is officially in the books, and with its conclusion, we've seen the end of most rookie players' first years. Some are still contributing to playoff teams, but for the most part, the top rookies are on teams that missed the playoffs, so we have all of the data possible on how their first seasons in the NBA have gone. This brings us to the topic of today's video, where we will be going through every player selected in the lottery of the 2020 NBA draft and giving out a grade to the selection 1 year after the fact, how the pick worked out, whether the player is showing solid promise, and how the player performed this season will all go into the grade, and it's not just based on the production of the player alone from their rookie seasons. Before we start though, it turns out about 62% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in order of the picks, the Timberwolves selected Anthony Edwards first overall, and the grade for this pick 1 year later is definitely an A+. Edwards started his rookie season a bit slow, trying to adjust to the pace and physicality of the league as a scorer, but in the second half of the season, he really turned things up a notch and started to look every bit like a #1 pick and go-to scorer. In his last 42 games of the season, he averaged over 23 points per game, shooting 45% from the field, which would be really good production for a player no matter the age, so doing it at 19 years old is exceptional. He's incredibly explosive around the rim, he can heat up quickly with his jump shot, and his dunks always make for unbelievable highlights. He's fun, he's talented, and he is promising, and the Wolves probably couldn't have asked for more from their #1 pick. Next up, with the second pick, the Warriors selected James Wiseman, and the grade for this one a year later is a C+. Wiseman had a fairly inconsistent rookie season, and while there were definitely moments of tremendous promise, there were unequal amounts of frustrating moments as well. The Warriors drafted Wiseman for the sake of team fit on draft night, which is a strategy that rarely works out, and especially considering the fact that they passed on the potential Rookie of the Year, who we'll be discussing next, it makes the pick look a bit worse. Wiseman himself still has a ton of potential for the future, and by no means will he be a bust, but when grading these picks a year later, the entire point is using the hindsight we have, and it just wasn't as good of a #2 pick as it could have been. Next up, with the third pick, the Hornets selected LaMelo Ball, and the grade for this selection a year later is another A+. Ball exceeded all expectations this year after coming into the league as a pretty polarizing prospect, and now a year later, he's the favorite to win this season's Rookie of the Year award. Ball is a phenomenal passer and overall playmaker for a player so young, his court vision is highly impressive, his touch around the basket on floaters and contested layups is solid, and his shooting ability also proved to be much better than advertised. He put up about 16 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists per game this year, shooting the ball 44% from the field and 35% from 3, and along with that impressive production, he also puts on a show on a nightly basis, racking up those numbers. Next up, with the fourth pick, the Bulls selected Patrick Williams, and the grade for this pick a year later is a B+. The pick received a lot of backlash by the general public at the time of the draft, and people were feeling as though it was a bit of a reach to take Williams as high as they did because he was viewed as much more of a project than a finished product at the time. However, Williams came out this season and outperformed all expectations people had for him. Putting up about 9 points and 5 rebounds per game, he was definitely put into a more reserved role. However, his efficiency, scoring it at 48% from the field and 39% from 3, are both way above league average, and far better than most rookies, who typically struggle with inefficiency and consistency. Williams has a nice mid-range game, he showed strong defensive promise, and taking him as high as the Bulls did definitely got justified by his first season. Next, with the fifth pick, the Cavaliers selected Isaac Okoro, and the grade for this selection a year later is a B. Okoro was drafted because of his defensive talents as a perimeter defender, and admittedly, his defense was the brightest part of his first season. He earned an immediate spot in the team's starting lineup, which shows how his coaching staff trusted him and his defensive abilities, but offensively, he's still quite raw. What was good, though, is that he looked like he was getting more comfortable as the season progressed, which is always what you want to see from young guys. He scored in double figures in 12 of the team's last 13 games that he played, including a 32-point outing against the Suns, and hopefully he can carry that momentum into next season. Up next with the 6th pick, the Hawks selected Onyeka Okongwu, and the grade for this selection a year later is a B+. Okongwu was a draft pick made with the future in mind for sure, because this season the team's front court was a bit crowded. He was coming off of an injury at the start of the year, and it took him a bit of time to truly break into the rotation, but once he did, he started bringing a legitimate impact off the bench for a Hawks team that played their best basketball in the second half of the year. Okongwu is a great defensive big man who has the instincts and feel to succeed on that end, not only as a rim protector, but as a switchable player as well, and offensively, he plays with a ton of energy, he runs up and down the floor, and is very good complementing Trae Young in the pick and roll. Next up with the 7th pick, the Pistons selected Killian Hayes, and the grade for this selection a year later is a C-. It's hard to get much of a fair read on Hayes a year later because he got injured early in the season and missed a lot of time because of it, but even in the time he spent on the court, he clearly showed he has a long way to go before he becomes a legitimately impactful player. Hayes was an intriguing prospect at the time of the draft, but in year 1 he shot the ball poorly and struggled with his decision-making. I will say that he is a naturally gifted passer of the basketball, and playmaking is something that will definitely get better for him over time, as is the case with most rookie point guards that struggle, but the rest of his game is where he needs drastic improvement. Up next with the 8th pick in the draft, the Knicks selected Obi Toppin, and the grade for this pick a year later is a D. Toppin was the College Player of the Year last year, but adjusting to the NBA has been a lot more difficult for him. He struggled to earn consistent minutes this season for a surprisingly good Knicks team, and in the time he did spend on the court, he left a lot to be desired. Obviously, the lack of opportunity makes it hard to fairly judge him, so it's not a complete failure of a pick by any means, but needless to say, the Knicks would definitely go elsewhere with this selection if they got a do-over. Up next with the 9th pick, the Wizards selected Deni Avdija, and the grade for this pick a year later is a B. Avdija's season got cut short by an injury, but prior to that happening, he was playing well in a reserved role on a Wizards team trying to compete for the playoffs. Being on a team with 2 established stars around him, he wasn't necessarily given complete freedom, but his versatile defense, transition playmaking, and spot-up shooting were all important for the Wizards when he was on the court. He's a very skilled player that should continue to get better over the years, and it will be interesting to follow that. Up next with the 10th pick, the Suns selected Jalen Smith, and the grade for this pick is an F a year later. Unfortunately, this was a pick that didn't seem to make much sense at the time, and nothing between then and now has really changed my mind on that notion. Yes, he was hampered by injuries for a large portion of the season, but he did still play in 27 games this year, and most of his appearances were in garbage time or very brief moments in stretches. He definitely could prove to be a reliable stretch big man in the NBA eventually, but he just isn't the kind of player that you should be drafting in the top 10. Next up with the 11th pick, the Spurs selected Devin Vassell, and the grade for this pick a year later is a C. Vassell was the 3-and-D prospect of this year's class, and that's exactly the kind of role that he played with the Spurs. Again, he didn't have that big of a role on a team that was competing for a playoff spot, but his defense shined through, and his shooting, albeit inconsistent, should prove to be more reliable as time goes on, and he becomes more comfortable at this level, because he did show stretches where he could shoot it really well. Next up with the 12th pick, the Kings selected Tyrese Haliburton, and the grade for this pick a year later is an A. Haliburton may very well be the steal of the draft, because he proved to everybody he's one of the best players in the class this season. He put up about 13 points and 5 assists per game on the year, he shot the ball incredibly efficiently at 47% from the field and 41% from 3, and on a Kings team that struggled mightily to play defense, Haliburton was one of the very very few bright spots on that end, which is strange for a rookie to be that good right away, and that, combined with his poise and confidence as a scorer and playmaker, provides excellent value for a player drafted outside of the top 10. Up next with the 13th pick, the Pelicans selected Kira Lewis, and the grade for this pick is a C. Lewis is a speedy point guard who showed he could be a problem in transition, but as is the case with a lot of young rookie point guards, he was pretty inconsistent. His decision-making needs work, and his shooting was hit or miss, so while he showed flashes of a player that can put pressure on defenses with his speed, he still has work to do for sure. And finally, with the 14th pick, the Boston Celtics selected Aaron Nesmith, and the grade for this pick a year later is a C+. Nesmith was viewed as the sharpshooter of the class, and over time, he earned himself more of a role in the rotation with the team as his shooting warmed up to the NBA. On the year as a whole, he shot 37% from 3, but over the last 15 games of the season, he was shooting a scorching hot 45%, and if that's a sign of him getting comfortable at this level, then he should be exactly the kind of shooter that they hoped he would be. And finally, with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below how you would grade each of these picks 1 year later. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.